I stood on my porch that crisp morning when the trouble started. Vance Caldwell's smile was polished and cruel as he stepped right up, his vest brushing my shoulder like it already owned the place. "Don't play citizen with me," he said. "People like you don't just live in places like this. Papers now." His hand hovered at his belt, not for safety, but for show. An agent laughed behind him. "Whole street's filming. He'll fold." I didn't flinch. My hands stayed open by instinct, posture locked the way it gets when chaos is measured, not feared. Caldwell lowered his voice, savoring every word. "Anonymous tip says you're illegal, and today I believe it." He had no idea who he was humiliating or how badly this moment would cost him. The morning sun cast long shadows across my front lawn as the ICE agents tightened their formation. My package lay forgotten on the doorstep, a mundane reminder of the normal morning that had just shattered. I kept my hands visible, years of tactical training kicking in automatically. "Sir, we need to see your documentation now." Caldwell's voice carried that artificial authority, pitched to reach the whole quiet street. Neighbors' curtains twitched. Car doors slammed as people delayed leaving for work, watching the scene unfold. Across the street, Quinn Navarro's hands trembled slightly as he held his phone steady, recording everything. The morning light caught the lens, making it briefly glint. One of the agents noticed and shot him a threatening glare. "I'd like to see your warrant," I stated calmly, my voice measured and clear. I remained perfectly still on my front steps, noting each agent's position, their gear, their body language. Everything about this felt wrong. Their aggressive stance, the lack of paperwork, the theatrical blocking of the street. Caldwell's smile turned ugly. "You don't get to make demands here. Show us proof of legal status or we'll have to assume the worst." He emphasized worst with obvious relish. "I'm a legal resident in my own home," I replied. "You need probable cause and a warrant for this kind of operation." "Listen to him trying to lecture us about the law," one of the other agents sneered. "They always think they know better." Caldwell took another step closer, invading my personal space. His badge read supervisor, but he had angled it to make the number unreadable. "Anonymous tip gives us all the cause we need, unless you've got something to hide." I noted how the other agents had spread out using standard containment positioning. They were creating a show of force for the growing audience of neighbors while also cutting off any potential escape routes. Professional, practiced, predatory. "Hey," Quinn's young voice carried across the street, "he hasn't done anything wrong." "You can't just shut that camera off, kid," an agent barked, starting to move toward him. "This is a federal operation." "Stay where you are, please," I called out to Quinn, my tone calm but commanding. "You have every right to film." I turned back to Caldwell. "And you know that's true." Caldwell's face darkened. He gestured to his men, who moved in closer. "Always trying to make things difficult. Always got to be the troublemaker." His voice dropped lower, meant for my ears only. "But that's what your kind does, isn't it? Push back 'cause problems, act entitled." More neighbors had emerged onto their porches now. Mrs. Ramirez from next door stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of concern. Mr. Whitaker from across the way was on his phone, likely calling someone for help, but help wouldn't come in time. I could read the situation clearly. "I'm going to reach for my phone," I stated clearly, movement slow and deliberate. "I'll call my lawyer." "No phones," Caldwell snapped, nodding to the agent nearest me. The man immediately moved to grab my arm, his grip unnecessarily tight. "Take your hands off me," I warned, my voice still steady but carrying an edge of steel. "Now you have no legal right." "Stop resisting!" Caldwell shouted, loud enough for the whole street to hear. The performance was beginning in earnest now. Another agent grabbed my other arm, both men using far more force than necessary against someone who hadn't shown any aggression. "He's not resisting," Quinn yelled, his phone still recording. "You're hurting him." I felt the cold metal of handcuffs against my wrist. I kept my breathing controlled, analyzing my options. The agents were escalating intentionally, trying to provoke a reaction they could use to justify whatever came next. Their grips were amateur, trained for intimidation rather than proper restraint technique. "Last chance?" Caldwell leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. "Show us papers right now, or this gets much worse for you." The metal of the cuffs bit deeper. Neighbors were shouting now. Quinn had moved closer, still filming despite the agent's threats. The morning sun caught the badge on Caldwell's chest, and I caught his full name and number at last. I committed it to memory along with every other detail of this moment. The entire scene unfolded quickly, but I could see exactly how it would play out. These men weren't here to verify anything. They had already decided who I was and what would happen next. The operation had been designed to humiliate, to demonstrate power, to remind everyone watching that they could be next. The peaceful morning shattered as an agent yanked my arm with unnecessary and deliberately painful force. I stumbled against my front door, the wooden frame shuddering from the impact. The sound drew more neighbors from their homes, faces appearing on porches up and down the street. "Stop resisting!" the agent holding me shouted, though I hadn't moved. His grip tightened until my fingers began to tingle. "I'm not resisting," I stated clearly, keeping my voice steady despite the growing pressure on my joints. I maintained my practiced stillness, developed through years of high-stakes situations far more dangerous than this. Another agent slammed his palm against my shoulder, driving me harder into the doorframe. The impact rattled my teeth, but I didn't flinch. Mrs. Ramirez gasped from her porch next door, clutching her morning coffee mug like a shield. "What's happening? Why are you hurting him?" Quinn's voice cracked with teenage outrage as he recorded everything on his phone. The morning light caught his lens perfectly, documenting each abuse in crystal-clear detail. "Ma'am, you need to comply immediately," one agent sneered, his badge conveniently turned away from view. "Though you people always act confused when the law catches up, don't you?" I kept my hands open and visible, my breathing controlled. I'd been trained to endure far worse than this. Each insult, each unnecessary shove, each moment of escalation, I cataloged it all with professional precision. "I have the right to know why I'm being detained," I said calmly, even as they twisted my arm further behind my back. "Rights?" An agent laughed, the sound ugly and sharp in the morning air. "You've got no rights until you prove you deserve them." More neighbors emerged now. Mr. Whitaker stood on his lawn in his bathrobe, phone pressed to his ear. The Martinez family watched from their driveway, their children's faces pressed against their car windows. The street had become an unwilling audience to this display of power. "Hey, back off with that camera, kid!" An agent suddenly broke formation, charging toward Quinn with aggressive intent. The teenager held his ground, hands shaking, but phone still steady. "I'm allowed to film. This is wrong, and everyone needs to see." The agent's hand shot out, knocking the phone from Quinn's grip. It clattered onto the sidewalk. Before Quinn could react, the agent's boot came down hard on the device, grinding metal and glass into the concrete. "Oops," the agent smirked, twisting his heel. "Shouldn't interfere with federal operations. That's illegal." Quinn's voice cracked with fury and fear. "You can't do that." "File a complaint," the agent mocked, turning back toward me. Through it all, I remained still, absorbing each escalation with practiced control. My military training screamed at me to act, but I waited, documented, evaluated until one agent, frustrated by my composure, deliberately wrenched my arm past its natural range. The crack of overstressed joints cut through the morning air. Something shifted in my eyes, a microscopic change that only someone trained to notice would catch. In one fluid motion, I pivoted on my back foot, using the agent's own momentum against him. My movements were precise, economical, nothing wasted. The agent holding my arm found himself suddenly off balance, his grip broken by leverage points he didn't even know existed. He hit the concrete with a heavy thud that knocked the wind from his lungs. Another agent lunged forward but met only air as I sidestepped, letting his own charge carry him stumbling past me. The entire sequence happened in an instant. Silence fell over the street. Neighbors stood frozen, coffee mugs and phones forgotten in their hands. The remaining agents stared, hands hovering uncertainly over weapons, confronted with something their training hadn't prepared them for. Competence. I stood perfectly centered on my front steps, hands still open, breathing steady. No wasted movement, no dramatic stance, just the absolute stillness of someone who knew exactly what he was capable of. The morning sun caught the sweat on my brow, the only sign of exertion. Caldwell's face had drained of color as he stared at me, his earlier smugness evaporating like morning dew. The agent on the ground wheezed, trying to regain his breath. The one who had stumbled regained his balance but didn't move closer, uncertainty clear in his posture. The confrontation was over, not through chaos or luck, but through pure skill that couldn't be mistaken for anything else. The neighborhood held its collective breath, watching as their understanding of me, the man who lived at number 247, underwent a seismic shift. For a moment, even the birds seemed to have gone quiet, as if nature itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The gentle morning breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and the faint echo of distant traffic, a surreal backdrop to the scene frozen on my front steps. The morning air crackled with tension as everyone processed what they'd just witnessed. I remained centered on my front steps, my stance relaxed but ready. The agent I'd thrown was slowly getting to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment. His colleague, who had stumbled, kept his distance, newfound respect evident in his cautious posture. Caldwell's complexion shifted from pale to scarlet. His hands trembled as he yanked his radio from his belt, nearly dropping it. "Code 3! Code 3!" He bellowed into the device, voice cracking. "I need immediate backup at this location." Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the mild morning temperature. His eyes darted between me and his scattered team, searching for any remnant of his previous control. Finding none, his volume increased to compensate. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he demanded, jabbing a finger toward me. Spittle flew from his lips as he continued. "You just assaulted federal agents. You're going away for a long time." Mrs. Ramirez had moved closer to her fence line, phone still recording. Mr. Whitaker had joined her, his bathrobe fluttering in the morning breeze. Other neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by Caldwell's shouting. The street had become an amphitheater with my front steps as center stage. My response came without theatrics, my voice carrying clearly across the tense silence. "Delta Force, active command." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of impact spreading through the gathered crowd. One of the younger agents straightened suddenly, recognition dawning on his face. Another cursed under his breath, taking an unconscious step backward. "Holy," someone whispered from the growing crowd. Radios crackled to life up and down the street as agents began urgent whispered conversations with their superiors. The agent who had destroyed Quinn's phone now looked like he wanted to crawl under the nearest rock. A woman walking her dog stopped at the edge of the scene, phone already raised. "Did he say Delta Force?" she asked loudly. The question bounced from person to person, growing in volume with each repetition. "The Delta Force! Special Forces! Oh my God!" Caldwell's authority evaporated like morning mist. His previous swagger deflated as he realized he'd managed to assault one of the military's most elite operators, on camera no less. His hands opened and closed reflexively as he processed this new reality. The teenage neighbor, Quinn, had borrowed his mother's phone and was still recording. "What's Delta Force?" he asked, his voice carrying in the quiet. "Special Operations," Mr. Whitaker answered, his voice filled with awe. The retired Army veteran straightened his bathrobe with newfound purpose. "The best of the best. They don't even officially exist." More whispers rippled through the crowd. Someone had pulled up a search on their phone, reading quietly about counterterrorism and classified missions. The neighbors who had watched me jog past their homes for months now saw me in an entirely new light. The morning sun continued its climb, casting long shadows across my yard. A newspaper delivery car crept past, the driver slowing to stare at the scene. The sound of distant sirens grew closer, Caldwell's backup responding to his call. I hadn't moved, hadn't raised my voice, hadn't made any attempt to capitalize on the revelation. I stood like someone who had nothing to prove, my calm presence more commanding than any shouted order. Several of the original agents began looking at their watches, suddenly remembering other appointments. One murmured something about paperwork and started edging toward his vehicle. The temporary holding pattern was clear. Nobody wanted to be the next one to put hands on a Delta Force commander. Caldwell's face twisted as he watched his authority dissolve. His career flashed before his eyes. The comfortable office, the power to make others squirm, the satisfaction of being untouchable. All of it threatened by this man who refused to behave like a victim. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple as he realized he had two choices: back down and lose face in front of his team, or double down and pray his superiors would back his play. His ego made the decision before his brain could catch up. "You think that matters here?" he snarled, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. You think a fancy title puts you above the law? The gathering crowd muttered in disapproval. Someone booed. Caldwell's head snapped toward the sound, his face darkening further. I don't care if you're Delta Force, Navy SEALs, or the King of England, he continued, voice rising to drown out the crowd's reaction. His authority was crumbling, and he knew only one way to respond. More force, more volume, more dominance. You resisted federal officers. You attacked my men. The backup sirens grew louder, multiple vehicles by the sound of it. Caldwell drew himself up, clinging to his last shreds of control. His next words came out as a desperate snarl, loud enough to echo off the houses. Take him anyway. The agents moved with artificial confidence, forming a tight circle around me. Their earlier hesitation had transformed into desperate compliance as Caldwell barked orders. 2 agents drew their tasers, hands trembling slightly as they aimed at my chest. For officer safety, Caldwell announced loudly, his voice carrying across the lawn. Subject has demonstrated hostile intent and combat capabilities. I remained still, my military training screaming against every survival instinct. I knew escalation would only feed their narrative. My eyes locked onto Caldwell's face, memorizing every detail, the sweat on his upper lip, the tension in his jaw, the way his left eye twitched. Last warning, one agent called out, his taser wavering. On the ground now. The neighborhood watched in horrified silence. Mrs. Ramirez clutched her phone tighter, tears streaming down her face as she continued recording. Mr. Whitaker had taken 2 steps forward before his wife grabbed his arm, holding him back. The taser barbs struck my chest like angry hornets. My muscles locked as electricity coursed through my body. I fought to stay upright, but physics won. My knees buckled and I hit the grass hard. The impact knocked the air from my lungs. Stop it! Quinn shouted from across the street. You can't do this! Caldwell spun toward the teenager's voice. Shut your mouth, kid, unless you want to join him. 2 agents grabbed my arms, dragging me across my own lawn. My combat boots left twin trails in the morning dew. The grass was cool against my cheek, the sensory detail oddly sharp despite the aftermath of the taser. My wrists were wrenched behind my back, cuffs ratcheting too tight. The metal bit into my skin. Phone check now, Caldwell ordered his team. Confiscate everything recording. Interference with federal agents is a felony. Agents spread out, snatching phones from shaking hands. Mrs. Ramirez tried to back away, but an agent cornered her against the fence. Hand it over, ma'am. Don't make this worse. Quinn's broken phone lay scattered across the concrete, its screen a spiderweb of cracks. The memory card had popped loose in the impact, and an agent's boot came down on it deliberately. Oops, he smirked, grinding the plastic into fragments. Mr. Whitaker found his voice. This is wrong. He's a soldier, for God's sake. He's a subject resisting lawful authority, Caldwell shot back. Anyone else want to question federal jurisdiction? We've got room for more. The neighbors fell silent, but their faces showed everything: disgust, fear, helpless rage. A child started crying somewhere, quickly hushed by a parent. My heart hammered against my ribs as they half carried, half dragged me toward the waiting van. The taser's effects were fading, replaced by a deep muscle ache. But my mind remained crystal clear, cataloging every detail with military precision. I recognized the model of van, standard issue for ICE field operations. I counted agents, noted positions, memorized faces. Most importantly, I understood exactly what Caldwell had just done. This wasn't a mistake anymore. This was knowing and willful detention of a federal warfighter without cause. They lifted me roughly into the van's cargo area. No seats, just bare metal floor. Standard procedure for short transport to processing. My shoulders slammed against the interior wall as they shoved me inside. Enjoy the ride, Caldwell sneered. Maybe you'll learn some respect for real authority. I said nothing. My silence seemed to unnerve him more than any response could have. He avoided my direct gaze as he stepped back. The van's rear doors swung shut with a heavy clang, cutting off my view of the neighborhood. Through the metal wall, I heard Caldwell shouting final threats at the witnesses. The engine rumbled to life. Sirens wailed in the distance, local police responding far too late to matter. The van lurched forward, tires crunching over my scattered mail. I braced myself against the movement, using my legs to stay somewhat stable. The metal floor was cold through my running clothes. The cuffs bit deeper with every bump and turn. Morning traffic sounds filtered through the van's walls. Car horns, acceleration, normal life continuing while mine had just been upended. The sirens faded behind us, growing fainter until they merged with the city's background noise. I focused on my breathing, using techniques honed through years of operations. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and steady. I ran combat calculations in my head, assessing resources and vulnerabilities. My wrists were already going numb from the too tight cuffs, but that was a problem for later. The van hit a pothole, bouncing me against the wall again. I could smell stale sweat and fear in the cargo area, evidence of previous occupants who had made this same journey under similar circumstances. But unlike those others, I understood exactly what Caldwell had set in motion. This wasn't just a bad day anymore. This wasn't even simple abuse of power. This was a federal officer knowingly detaining a member of an elite military unit without cause. This was multiple agents participating in or witnessing the same crime. This was destruction of evidence, intimidation of witnesses, excessive force, and half a dozen other violations that would end careers once exposed. Caldwell hadn't just made a mistake. He'd started a war he didn't understand with an opponent he had gravely underestimated. But that realization would come later. For now, the van carried me deeper into the city, away from my home, into a system designed to make people disappear. Late morning sunlight filtered through narrow windows high in the processing center's holding room, casting harsh shadows across institutional green walls. I sat perfectly still on the metal bench, my wrists raw from hours in the same tight cuffs. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale sweat. Through the thin walls, I could hear the constant buzz of fluorescent lights and fragments of conversation from the processing area. Phones rang unanswered. Printers churned out paperwork. Someone laughed too loudly at a joke I couldn't make out. An agent appeared at the reinforced glass window, tapping his pen against a clipboard. "Hale," he called out, deliberately mispronouncing my name. "Says here you're claiming military status." "Not claiming. I am active Delta Force Command." I kept my voice steady and professional. "My ID number is—" Yeah, he waved his hand dismissively. "Everyone's got a story. Stand up, face the wall." 2 guards entered, their boots squeaking on the linoleum. They patted me down again, the 3rd time since arrival, before escorting me to a processing desk. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder out here, reflecting off white walls and metal surfaces. "Name?" The intake officer didn't look up from his computer. "Commander Lennox Hale. My military ID—" "Sorry, system's showing Lennox Hale misspelled. Probably what was entered at pickup. Can't change it now." "That's incorrect. I need to make a phone call." "Phones are down for maintenance." He stamped several forms without reading them. "Next station." They moved me through a series of checkpoints, each one stripping away another layer of identity. My running clothes were exchanged for an orange jumpsuit. My shoelaces were confiscated. My requests for legal representation were met with blank stares or vague promises to pass it along. In the medical screening room, a tired-looking nurse barely glanced at the abrasions on my wrists from the too tight cuffs. "Minor irritation," she noted. "Nothing requiring treatment." I need to contact my commanding officer." I tried again. "This is a serious, above my pay grade." The nurse cut me off. "I just do intake screening." Outside the facility's walls, I couldn't know that fragments of Quinn's video were already spreading across social media. Clips showing ICE agents attacking a black man on his own porch, the taser deployment, the phone destruction, all of it uploaded and taken down repeatedly as accounts were flagged and suspended. Local news stations teased the story in brief segments, but offered no follow-up, no investigation, no demands for accountability. By early afternoon, an ICE spokesperson appeared at a hastily arranged press conference. He stood at a podium, hands clasped professionally, voice calm and rehearsed. "This morning's enforcement action was conducted lawfully and appropriately," he stated. "While we cannot comment on specific cases, all procedures were followed according to established protocol. Any claims to the contrary are being investigated internally." Back inside, I sat in yet another holding room, watching shadows creep across the floor as the day wore on. My requests for a phone call were met with different excuses each time. The public defender's office was notified, but never reached. My military ID number was entered incorrectly 3 times before being dismissed as unverifiable. I recognized the pattern. This wasn't chaos or incompetence, it was design. Every mistake created another layer of bureaucratic distance between me and accountability. Every system error bought them more time. Every policy requirement pushed me deeper into a maze built to exhaust resistance. The afternoon crawled by in 15-minute increments, marked by guard shifts and overhead announcements. I maintained my composure, my military training providing a framework for endurance. I logged each interaction, each denial, each procedural requirement in my memory. The system expected anger, expected protests. I gave them neither. A round evening movement in the hallway signaled a shift change. New guards appeared, checking clipboards and comparing notes. Through the window, I could see the parking lot shadows lengthening as dusk approached. "Transport time," a guard announced, entering with restraints. "Stand up. Face the wall." They secured me in a chain between 2 other detainees. The group shuffled through a series of security doors, emerging into the cooling evening air. A white bus waited in the loading area, its windows tinted dark, its destination undisclosed. The other detainees spoke quietly in Spanish and Creole, their voices tight with fear. I noted the bus company's name, a private contractor I'd never heard of. The driver didn't wear a uniform, just a company polo shirt with no visible ID. They were loaded efficiently, secured to the seats with additional restraints. No paperwork was visible, no destination was announced. The bus's engine rumbled to life as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. Through the tinted window, I watched the processing center recede. The facility's lights flickered on automatically as dusk approached, illuminating the American flag that hung limp and still in the evening air. Traffic moved normally on the nearby streets, drivers unaware or unconcerned about the bus and its cargo of disappeared people. The bus turned onto the main road, merging with commuter traffic heading home for the day. No one looked twice at the unmarked vehicle. No one questioned its purpose or destination. The system had worked exactly as designed, processing resistance into silence, turning outrage into paperwork, making inconvenient people vanish into bureaucratic shadows. The bus rolled to a stop in front of Redstone Transitional Detention Facility. As night settled over the desert, floodlights cast harsh shadows across razor wire and concrete walls. The facility sprawled low against the landscape, utilitarian and institutional, its windows narrow and reinforced. Guards efficiently unloaded detainees, their movements practiced and impersonal. Inside, the intake area hummed with fluorescent lights and machinery. The air felt thick with disinfectant and processed air. Lena Price stood at the intake desk, her tailored blazer and pearls incongruous against the institutional backdrop. She smiled with corporate precision, clipboard in hand, as though welcoming guests to a hotel. "Good evening," she said, voice pleasant but empty. "I'm Administrator Price. Welcome to Redstone." She checked her papers. "Ah, yes, our special guest, the commander." 2 female guards led me to a processing room. "Strip search," one announced flatly. "Standard procedure." I complied silently, enduring the invasive search with military discipline. The guards' latex gloves snapped loudly in the small space. Their movements were mechanical, designed to emphasize powerlessness. "Arms up, Commander," one guard smirked, drawing out the title. "We wouldn't want to miss anything important." After the search, they issued me facility clothing, thin cotton and dull orange, several sizes too large. The pants dragged under my heels. The shirt hung loose, making me look diminished. "Medical screening," Price announced, appearing in the doorway. She gestured to a small exam room where a tired-looking nurse waited. "Any conditions we should know about?" the nurse asked without looking up from her form. "The cuff injuries need treatment," I stated calmly. "And the taser burns." "Minor irritation," the nurse interrupted, checking boxes rapidly. "Nothing urgent? Drink water?" Price smiled apologetically. "We provide excellent medical care here, but we have to prioritize serious conditions. I'm sure you understand." They led me through security doors to the housing unit. The space was packed tight, bunks crowded together, belongings crammed into small lockers. The air felt stale and heavy with too many bodies breathing the same recycled oxygen. Women lay on bunks or sat in small groups speaking softly in multiple languages. Their faces showed bone-deep exhaustion. Some watched me with dull curiosity. Others kept their eyes down, trained by experience to avoid attention. "Your assigned bunk," a guard indicated, pointing to an upper mattress. "Count is at capacity. Medical requests go through proper channels, no exceptions." "Yes, Commander," another guard added with exaggerated deference. "Wouldn't want to upset the chain of command." I climbed onto the thin mattress, noting how it sagged in the middle. From this vantage point, I had a clear view of the unit's layout: 2 guard stations, 4 cameras with obvious blind spots, emergency exits that stayed locked. I logged the details automatically, my training turning observation into tactical assessment. The guard's patrol pattern was obvious: clockwise rotation, 15-minute intervals, 3 blind spots between loops. Staff changes happened at predictable times. Camera coverage failed to reach several corners. The facility's security relied more on bureaucracy than actual vigilance. A woman in the next bunk coughed deeply, the sound wet and concerning. No one responded, no staff checked. The message was clear. Illness was expected. Help was not. "Medical line is tomorrow," someone whispered in Spanish. "But they never have enough time to see everyone." I watched Price conduct an evening walkthrough, heels clicking precisely on concrete. She stopped to speak with guards, her corporate smile never wavering. This was a business transaction to her, human cargo managed for profit margins. A young woman sobbed quietly in the corner, fresh from intake. The sound carried in the enclosed space. Other detainees offered quiet comfort in various languages, a solidarity born of shared powerlessness. "First night's the hardest," an older woman said softly, "but you learn to sleep through anything here." The overhead lights flickered, a warning. Women hurried to finish bathroom routines and last-minute preparations. Some knelt quickly beside bunks, prayers whispered urgently before darkness. Without warning, the lights shut off completely. The darkness felt absolute for several seconds before eyes adjusted to faint light from the guard station. The unit filled with nighttime sounds, coughing, crying, murmured prayers in a dozen languages. Someone shifted on a creaking mattress. Another stifled a sob. I lay still, fully awake, cataloging each sound and movement. The guard's flashlight beam swept past on schedule. Keys jingled at the station. A door opened and closed somewhere in the facility. The ventilation system hummed steadily, recycling the same tired air. More coughing echoed in the darkness, deep concerning sounds that should have prompted medical attention. Whispered conversations carried across the unit, detainees sharing fragments of hope and fear in muted tones. "My children," someone whispered in the dark. 3 weeks now, no word. "The lawyer promised," another voice responded, "but no one comes." "Pray with me, sister," a third voice offered quietly. The night settled into a rhythm of suppressed sounds, the language of contained humanity. Bodies shifted on thin mattresses. Someone hummed softly, a lullaby perhaps. The guard's boots marked time with mechanical precision. I remained motionless, but my mind worked steadily, mapping the facility's patterns. Every sound, every movement, every procedure revealed something useful. The system's power relied on isolation and hopelessness. But patterns meant predictability. Predictability created opportunity. A woman began to pray softly in Arabic, her words a whispered lifeline in the darkness. Others joined in their own languages: Spanish, Creole, Mandarin, a multilingual chorus of faith and desperation. The sound wove through the shadows, bridging the spaces between bunks, between lives interrupted and futures uncertain. The guard's flashlight beam cut through the darkness again, right on schedule. Keys jingled, the ventilation hummed. In the corner, someone still sobbed quietly, the sound muffled by a thin blanket. The fluorescent lights snapped on, harsh and sudden. Guards moved through the unit, banging batons against metal bed frames. "Line up, count time," a guard's voice echoed off concrete walls. "Everyone on your feet." Women scrambled from bunks, pulling on orange uniforms, rushing to form lines. Some had clearly slept in their clothes, prepared for this daily ritual. The air filled with shuffling feet and whispered prayers. I took my place, noting how the woman next to me trembled slightly. Maria Santiago, I'd learned the night before, 3 weeks detained, diabetes requiring regular insulin. The The medical staff kept losing her paperwork. Eyes forward, no talking. Guard Jenkins paced the line, his badge gleaming under fluorescent lights. Administrator Price stood at the unit entrance, tablet in hand, watching with corporate detachment. 5 minutes into count it happened. A woman 3 spaces down swayed visibly. Her hand clutched her chest, face gray with pain. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the morning chill. "I can't... my chest," she gasped in heavily accented English. "Please help." "Stay in line," Jenkins barked. "No disruptions during count." The woman's knees buckled. 2 detainees moved to catch her, but Jenkins stepped forward threateningly. "Back in line now." "She needs medical attention," I stated firmly, my command voice cutting through the tension. "This could be cardiac." "Another backseat doctor," Jenkins sneered. "It's just anxiety. They all panic sometimes." The woman slumped to the floor, breathing in sharp, painful gasps. Her eyes rolled back, showing whites. Someone started praying rapidly in Spanish. Price finally looked up from her tablet. "If you're truly unwell, we'll add you to medical call-out," she said smoothly. "But disrupting count means disciplinary action. Your choice." The woman tried to respond but could only wheeze. Her fingers clawed at her chest. "Medical emergency," I announced loudly, making sure other guards could hear. "Patient presenting with chest pain and respiratory distress." Jenkins stepped closer, baton tapping meaningfully against his leg. "One more word and you're in segregation, Commander." The woman on the floor made a terrible choking sound. Still, no one moved to help. "Back to count positions," Price ordered crisply. "We'll handle this after proper procedures are complete." The count dragged on. The woman lay gasping on the cold floor, ignored by staff. Other detainees watched helplessly, fear and anger mixing in their eyes. Finally, 2 medical techs arrived with a wheelchair. They lifted the semi-conscious woman without gentleness or urgency. Her head lolled as they wheeled her out. "Medical call-out starts later," Price announced to the unit. "Submit requests through proper channels." She clicked away on her heels, tablet tucked under her arm. I immediately walked to the guard station and requested a medical form. The guard handed it over with obvious reluctance. I filled it out carefully, documenting everything I'd observed: time of onset, symptoms, staff response, delay in treatment. My military training showed in the precise clinical details. "This needs immediate processing," I stated, holding out the completed form. The guard dropped it in an overflowing tray marked pending review without even glancing at it. "Medical will get to it when they get to it." Throughout the morning, women whispered about the incident. The woman's name was Lucia Mendez. She'd been complaining of chest pain for days. Medical kept telling her to drink water and rest. By afternoon, rumors spread that Lucia had been taken to an outside hospital. No official announcement was made. Her bunk was stripped and reassigned within hours. I watched the process unfold with cold clarity. How quickly a person could vanish here, how easily suffering could be buried in paperwork and procedure. I began constructing a mental record, knowing paper could be destroyed, but memory could preserve truth. Initial collapse during count, the delay in medical response, patient removed from unit, bunk stripped, new detainee assigned to the space. I memorized faces, names, badge numbers: Jenkins, who denied help; Price, who prioritized procedure over life; the medical techs who arrived too late with too little concern. Each detail carefully stored away. Other women noticed me watching. A few approached quietly throughout the day, sharing their own stories of medical neglect in whispers. My sister waited 2 weeks for insulin. They ignore pregnancy complications. My friend's infection spread because they wouldn't treat it. I listened, memorizing each account. The pattern was clear. Neglect wasn't an accident here. It was policy. That evening, I heard Jenkins and another guard, Rodriguez, talking outside the unit door. Their voices carried through the window. "Heard the chest pain one got carted off in the ambulance," Rodriguez said. Jenkins laughed. "Yeah, another one who couldn't hack it. They never learn. Making a scene just makes it worse." "At least the paperwork's easier when they go off-site," Rodriguez replied. "Administrator Price likes a clean chart." They moved away, still chuckling. In the unit, women bowed their heads. Some cried quietly. Others stared ahead with empty eyes, perhaps wondering who would be next. I lay on my bunk, memorizing every word I'd heard, every laugh, every casual dismissal of human life. The system relied on forgetting, on erasing its victims from memory as easily as names from papers. But I would remember every detail, every face, every moment that proved this wasn't justice or security. It was calculated cruelty masked by bureaucracy. The recreation yard at Redstone was a concrete rectangle surrounded by chain link and razor wire. Women walked in slow circles or sat on metal benches, shoulders hunched against the evening chill. Guards watched from elevated positions, their shadows stretching long across the yard. I paced the perimeter, counting steps, noting camera positions. 23 paces north to south, 18 east to west, 3 blind spots where fencing created shadows, 2 guards per shift rotating positions every 30 minutes. Ma'am. A quiet voice interrupted my observations. Guard Tom Keller stood nearby, maintaining careful distance. His uniform was perfectly pressed, badge polished to a shine. "Could I speak with you a moment?" I studied him, mid-30s, clean-cut, nervous energy beneath his professional demeanor. I'd noticed him watching me during meals, his expression troubled. "Of course, Officer Keller," I replied evenly. He glanced around before stepping closer. "What happened to you? It isn't right. Some of us know that." I remained silent, face neutral. "Look, I can help," Keller continued. "There's a proper grievance process if you file the right paperwork through the right channels." He slipped a form from his pocket, folding it small. "I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go." I accepted the paper without expression, though warning bells rang in my mind. His eagerness felt rehearsed, his sympathy too convenient. "That's very kind," I said carefully. "Just be detailed," Keller added. "Names, dates, everything that happened. I'll handle it personally." I nodded once, tucking the form away. I'd seen this before in combat zones, the friendly local official who offered help while feeding intelligence to the enemy. The seemingly sympathetic guard who set up prisoners for attempted escape. "Recreation time's ending," another guard shouted. "Line up for return to units." Keller stepped back, resuming his professional distance. "Good luck, sir," he said, loud enough to be heard. Back in my bunk, I examined the form under harsh fluorescent light. Standard grievance paperwork, but something about the routing numbers seemed wrong. I'd memorized facility procedures during intake. This didn't match. Still, I began filling it out, choosing words with military precision. No emotions, just facts. Times, locations, badge numbers, a record that couldn't be twisted. Women around me prepared for lights out, changing clothes, washing faces, whispering prayers. The unit smelled of industrial cleaner and unwashed bodies. Someone 2 bunks over coughed wetly, another ignored medical request. I had just finished writing when heavy boots approached. 3 guards entered the unit, equipment jingling. "Hail, on your feet, hands where we can see them." Women scrambled away as the guards surrounded my bunk. Through the unit windows, I glimpsed Keller watching, face carefully blank. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Cold steel closed around my wrists. The guards marched me out past frightened faces and whispered prayers. They brought me to an administrative office where Price waited, looking annoyed at the late hour. On her desk lay my grievance form, already altered with angry scratches and threatening language that wasn't my writing. "Threatening staff is a serious offense," Price said smoothly. "Guard Keller reported you made aggressive statements during recreation. This form confirms a pattern of hostility." I saw Keller through the office window, still watching, still blank-faced. A man who'd learned to survive by helping power hurt people. "The form's been altered," I stated flatly. "Are you accusing my staff of misconduct?" Price's smile was sharp. "That's another violation. You've left us no choice but to place you in administrative segregation. For everyone's safety, of course." The guards grabbed my arms, steering me down stark hallways. Their boots echoed off concrete. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. They stopped at a heavy metal door marked Isolation Unit 3. Inside was a bare cell. Narrow bunk, steel toilet, nothing else. The space felt hungry, designed to devour hope and time. "Strip search," a guard ordered. I endured the humiliation with military discipline, focusing on memorizing details. Guard badges, camera positions, the sound of keys. Every piece of information was ammunition. They took my uniform, leaving only a thin smock. The concrete floor bit cold through paper slippers. "You should have just kept quiet," one guard muttered as they prepared to leave. "Played along like everyone else." I stood at parade rest, spine straight, eyes forward. I'd survived worse cells in worse places. They wanted to break my spirit by proving no one could be trusted. Instead, they just confirmed what I needed to know. The whole system was compromised. From Keller's false sympathy to Price's corporate cruelty, the door slammed shut with a metallic boom. Darkness swallowed the cell, broken only by harsh fluorescent light bleeding under the door. The silence pressed in, thick as armor. In the distance, I heard Keller's voice as he passed. "It's better this way. He'll learn." But I stood unmoving in the center of my cell, already turning isolation into advantage. They thought they were burying me. They didn't understand. Sometimes the best position for gathering intelligence was from inside the machine. The isolation cell's fluorescent lights had long since blurred into a constant buzzing presence. I sat on the thin mattress, back straight against the concrete wall, maintaining my internal clock despite the unchanging light. Multiple sets of boots moved with purpose in the corridor. Keys jingled. Then the viewing slot in my door scraped open. "Stand up, Hale. Face the wall. Hands behind your back." I complied with measured movements. The door opened and 3 guards entered. Through the doorway I glimpsed Administrator Price in her press suit, accompanied by an unfamiliar man in military dress blues. "Commander Hale," the military officer said, his voice carrying authority. "I'm Major Richardson, Judge Advocate General's office. We've confirmed your status and current assignment. This detention was unauthorized." Price's corporate smile had developed a slight strain. "There appears to have been a miscommunication regarding Commander Hale's documentation. We're fully cooperating to resolve—" "Save it," Richardson cut her off. "Judge Martinez has ordered his immediate transfer out of ICE custody. I have the paperwork here." I remained facing the wall, but my senses tracked every movement, every micro-expression reflected in the polished steel toilet. Price's perfectly manicured nails drumming against her tablet, the guards shifting uneasily. "Of course," Price said smoothly. "We'll begin transfer procedures right away." Outside the facility, engines rumbled as vehicles arrived. Through the narrow window, I caught fragments of noise, chanting, car horns, the distinct sound of protest. "Quite a crowd out there," Richardson commented. "Local news has been covering this story all morning. Veterans groups, church leaders, community organizations, they're all demanding answers." A guard approached with shackles. I let them chain my wrists and ankles, noting how they avoided meeting my eyes. The restraints were excessive for transfer, but I recognized the intent. One final show of control. They escorted me through the facility's sterile corridors. Other detainees pressed against cell windows, watching silently. In the medical wing, the nurse who'd ignored countless requests suddenly found paperwork to study. Guard Keller was nowhere to be seen. The intake area smelled of disinfectant and fear. My personal belongings, the clothes I'd worn on my porch that morning, my house keys, my military ID, were returned in a plastic bag. They didn't let me change. "The transfer vehicle is ready," Price announced, still maintaining her professional veneer. "We've arranged secure transport to—" "I'll handle the arrangements," Richardson interrupted. "Commander Hale is no longer in ICE custody." Through the administrative windows, I could see the crowd more clearly now. Dozens of people lined the facility fence. Signs demanded justice. American flags waved. A group of veterans in uniform stood at attention facing the building. News vans crowded the parking lot. Cameras pointed at the entrance. Reporters shouted questions at facility staff who hurried past, heads down. The story had broken wide open. A black SUV with government plates waited at the sally port, flanked by 2 police cruisers. As we approached the vehicle, I cataloged details: diplomatic plates, Federal Protective Service markings, proper security protocols. Everything appeared legitimate. "The judge was very clear," Richardson explained as a guard unlocked my shackles. "You're to be transferred to military custody immediately. We have MPs waiting at Fort Carson to process you back into proper status." Relief flickered through my chest, small, dangerous, quickly suppressed. I'd seen too many moments of apparent victory turn hollow. The crowd's chanting grew louder as the Sally Port gate opened. Signs became readable. "Free Commander Hale! Stop ICE abuse! Veterans deserve better!" Price stepped forward one last time, hand extended professionally. "Commander, we regret any inconvenience." I looked straight through her, denying her the closure of a polite fiction. After a moment, Price's hand dropped. The SUV's interior was cool and clean. Richardson sat beside me while two armed federal agents took the front seats. As we pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of the facility. Stark walls, razor wire, and the crowd still growing outside its gates. They merged onto the highway heading south. I watched mile markers pass, tracking their route. The driver maintained proper protocol, staying in formation with the police escorts. Everything seemed correct, yet something in my gut remained coiled tight. Richardson reviewed paperwork, occasionally speaking into a phone. The federal agents maintained professional silence. Through the tinted windows, I noted we'd passed 3 exits that would have led to Fort Carson. Then, the SUV's turn signal clicked on. We were leaving the highway, taking an unmarked exit that curved away from the city. The police escorts continued straight ahead, their red and blue lights disappearing into traffic. I sat motionless, mind racing. The road ahead led nowhere listed in my transfer documents. The vehicle's interior suddenly felt smaller, more confined, but I kept my breathing steady, my posture relaxed. I'd learned long ago that the most dangerous moments required the greatest control. The SUV continued down the empty road as afternoon shadows lengthened across the pavement. No other cars followed. No landmarks offered reference. We were heading somewhere deliberately unlisted, and I could only wait to learn why. The SUV pulled into a loading bay lit by harsh floodlights. The building looked more like a warehouse than a detention center. No signs, no markings, just concrete walls and security cameras. I noted the complete absence of other vehicles or personnel. This wasn't standard procedure. This was deliberate isolation. Richardson's professional demeanor had vanished. He now moved with the stiff urgency of someone following unwanted orders. The federal agents flanked me as they led me inside, their earlier formality replaced by cold efficiency. The intake area was smaller than Redstone's, just a single desk and a metal detector. A bored-looking clerk barely glanced up from his computer as we entered. The room smelled of bleach and old coffee. "Processing transfer," the clerk muttered, fingers tapping at his keyboard. "Name, Commander Lennox Hale," Richardson stated. The clerk squinted at his screen. "Not seeing that. God, Lennox Hale, though, that must be it. Typos happen." His tone made it clear this was no accident. I watched my identity being erased with a few keystrokes. My military rank, my proper name, my entire documented existence, all vanishing behind deliberate errors designed to make me unfindable. They took my fingerprints again, photographed me again, issued me new detention wear. Every step of processing was performed as if I were a new arrival with no prior record. The methodical erasure of my previous detention was happening right in front of me. "Phone call?" I asked, knowing the answer. The clerk didn't even look up. "System's down, maybe tomorrow." A familiar voice came from the hallway, dripping with satisfaction. "Now, isn't this more appropriate?" Supervisor Vance Caldwell stepped into view, hands clasped behind his back. He'd changed into a fresh uniform, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The smirk on his face spoke of a man who believed he'd won. "Paperwork is a beautiful thing," he said, moving closer. "When done correctly, it can make anything disappear." He emphasized the last word, savoring it. "No more cameras here, no protesters, no interfering mayors or journalists, just proper procedure." I met his gaze steadily, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a response. My silence only seemed to encourage him. "You know what I love most about this job?" Caldwell continued, circling me like a shark. "Teaching people where they really stand. All that military status you were so proud of doesn't mean anything now. Here you're just another number in the system, a very carefully managed number." Through the small window in the intake area, I could see a TV mounted in the guard break room. The local news was playing silently. Mayor Lyle Bergen stood at a podium, his face a mask of practiced concern as he addressed reporters. Even without audio, I could read his body language, the careful gestures, the diplomatic non-answers. His lips formed familiar phrases, conducting a review, urging patience, respecting federal jurisdiction, the perfect performance of a man determined not to help. The guards processed my belongings methodically, logging each item with exaggerated care. My military ID was accidentally dropped, the corner cracking against the floor. My dog tags were cataloged under miscellaneous metal items. Every action designed to strip away my identity, my dignity, my existence in the outside world. They led me down a narrow corridor lined with empty cells. The facility was eerily quiet compared to Redstone. No voices, no movement, just the buzz of fluorescent lights and the echo of our footsteps. This wasn't a normal detention center. This was a place designed for people meant to be forgotten. The cell they assigned me was bare, except for a thin mattress and a stainless steel toilet sink combination. The door closed with a heavy clang that seemed to seal me off from the world entirely. Through my tiny window, I could see just a slice of the night sky. Somewhere out there, people were protesting, demanding answers, waving signs with my name. But they were looking in the wrong place, fighting the wrong battle. The system had simply absorbed their pressure and redirected it, like a martial artist turning an opponent's force against them. I sat on the hard mattress, back straight, hands relaxed on my knees. I closed my eyes, but my mind remained sharp, alert. The time for enduring was over. Now was the time for strategy. I began mapping the facility in my mind, the guard rotations I'd observed, the camera positions, the security procedures. I noted which guards avoided eye contact, which ones showed hints of discomfort with their roles. I recalled every name mentioned, every snippet of conversation overheard. The system that held me wasn't just bars and walls. It was procedures, paperwork, and people. It operated on assumptions of powerlessness, on the expectation that its victims would be too broken or scared to fight back effectively. But they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd given me time to study their methods, to understand their weaknesses. Caldwell and his allies were betting on me disappearing quietly, becoming another ghost in their machine. They thought isolation would break my spirit. Instead, it had given me clarity. Every aspect of my training, the tactical analysis, the psychological warfare, the strategic planning, could be turned against this system. In the darkness of my cell, I began to plan, not an escape that would only validate their actions. No, I would dismantle their operation from within, using their own procedures and protocols against them. They thought they'd buried me. They were about to learn they'd only given me a foundation to build upon. The fluorescent lights flickered to life, harsh and sudden. 2 guards appeared at my cell door, their faces arranged in professional masks that didn't quite hide their anticipation. "Medical screening," the taller guard announced, his voice flat. "Stand and face the wall." I complied, noting how they positioned themselves, too close, too eager for an excuse. Their hands stayed near their batons as they cuffed me. The restraints clicked several notches tighter than necessary, but I kept my expression neutral. The hallways were empty at this hour. Our footsteps echoed off bare concrete walls as they led me through a maze of corridors. I mapped each turn, each security door, building my mental layout of the facility. This wasn't the way to medical. They were heading deeper into the administrative section where cameras were conspicuously absent. They stopped at a heavy door, marked Storage B7. The shorter guard unlocked it, revealing a bare concrete room with a metal table bolted to the floor. No windows, no cameras, no witnesses. "Inside," the taller guard ordered, shoving me forward. The room smelled of cleaning chemicals and something metallic. Old bloodstains marked the floor, despite attempts to scrub them away. This wasn't their first medical screening. Supervisor Vance Caldwell stepped in behind them, closing the door with deliberate slowness. He'd changed into casual clothes, no uniform, no badge, nothing official to document. He pulled latex gloves from his pocket, snapping them on with practiced ease. "Good morning, Commander," he said, making my rank sound like an insult. "I hope you're finding our accommodations educational." I remained silent, watching him circle the room. His movements were relaxed, almost playful, a predator confident in his territory. "You know what I find fascinating?" Caldwell continued, leaning against the table. "How quickly important things become meaningless. Take your military record, for instance." He pulled a folder from under his arm. "Very impressive on paper. Combat deployments, commendations, classified operations, all just irrelevant paperwork." Now he opened the folder, making a show of reading. All those missions defending America. And here you are, detained as a potential threat to national security. Ironic, isn't it? I kept my breathing steady, my stance balanced. I'd endured worse interrogations, but this was different. This wasn't about information. It was about breaking my spirit. "We have some paperwork of our own to handle," Caldwell said, producing another document. "A simple incident report. Seems you became combative during routine processing. Attacked 2 officers. Very unfortunate." He held out a pen. "Sign it, and maybe we can discuss improving your conditions." I looked at the report, then back at Caldwell. My silence was answer enough. His face hardened. "I was afraid you'd be difficult about this." He nodded to the guards. "Make sure he understands the situation." The taller guard grabbed my cuffed hands, yanking them up behind my back until my shoulders screamed. The other guard drove his knee into my thigh, targeting the nerve cluster. Pain shot through my leg, but I refused to cry out. "Still playing soldier?" Caldwell mocked. "This isn't a battlefield. There's no honor here. No medals for endurance. You're just another detainee who doesn't know when to submit." They kept me there for hours. Pressure points, stress positions, calculated pain that left no obvious marks. Through it all, I remained silent, focusing on my breathing, memorizing every detail. Names muttered, techniques used, timing of shift changes outside. When they finally tired of their game, Caldwell leaned in close. "This is just the beginning. Everyone breaks eventually, even Delta Force commanders." They dragged me to the actual medical unit where a middle-aged nurse waited. The woman's eyes widened slightly at my condition, but she kept her face professionally blank until the guard stepped outside. As she gently examined my bruises, the nurse whispered, "I saw them take you to B7. I know what they do there." Her hands trembled slightly as she applied antiseptic. "This isn't right. None of this is right." I studied the nurse's face, the fear in her eyes, but also determination. Here was someone with access, with knowledge, and most importantly, with a conscience I couldn't ignore. The guards returned too soon, impatient to return me to my cell. As they led me away, I caught the nurse's gaze one last time. The woman quickly looked down at her charts, but not before I recognized the mix of terror and resolve in her expression. Back in my cell, I carefully stretched my injured muscles, processing everything I'd learned. Caldwell had meant to break my will. Instead, he'd revealed the facility's pressure points, the gaps in surveillance, the shift patterns, and most crucially, the staff members whose humanity hadn't been completely corrupted by the system. My body ached, but my mind remained sharp. Each burst of pain was a reminder, a data point to be used. They thought they were teaching me helplessness. In reality, they were showing me exactly how their machine worked and where it could be dismantled. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the narrow windows of the detention center as Angela Morales pushed her medication cart down the sterile hallway. Her hands shook slightly as she checked each cell number, her nurse's badge feeling heavier than usual against her chest. The regular guards had grown used to her presence, barely glancing up from their phones as she made her rounds. To them, she was just another cog in the machine, distributing pills and checking vitals with mechanical precision. They didn't notice how her clipboard held more than just medication charts, or how her eyes lingered on certain inmates longer than others. As she approached my cell, Angela's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd watched them bring me back from medical screening that morning, saw how I moved with careful precision despite obvious pain. It wasn't the first time she'd witnessed such treatment, but something about my quiet strength had finally crystallized Angela's growing horror into resolve. "Evening medications," Angela announced, her voice steady despite her nerves. She slipped a paper cup with 2 pills through the cell door's meal slot, along with a tiny folded scrap of paper hidden beneath. I accepted the cup without expression, but my fingers brushed Angela's deliberately as I took it. The message passed between us in seconds, invisible to the cameras above. 3 hours later, during the chaos of shift change, Angela found herself in the perfect position. New guards were arriving. Day shift was leaving and the cameras in Section C had been malfunctioning since lunch, a regular occurrence that maintenance never seemed to fix. "I need to check his stitches," Angela told the departing guard, gesturing at my cell. It was a lie. I had no stitches, but the guard merely shrugged, too eager to leave to question it. Inside the cell, Angela's professional demeanor cracked. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, hands trembling as she pretended to examine my arm. "Last week a man died of diabetic shock because they wouldn't let me give him insulin. They said his paperwork wasn't in order." I sat perfectly still, my voice barely audible. "How long have you been documenting?" 6 months, Angela replied. "I started taking pictures of the logs after the second preventable death. They make us change the cause of death. Backdate requests for care that never happened. I have proof. Everything's on my personal phone, locked in my locker." "Digital evidence is vulnerable," I cautioned. "They can claim manipulation or delete files remotely. You need paper copies stored off-site." Angela nodded. "I started printing key documents last month, death certificates that don't match our internal records, care requests that disappeared, orders to deny treatment that came directly from administration." Outside, the cell voices echoed as new guards settled in. Angela's hands moved automatically through the motions of a medical check while I spoke. "Listen carefully. Don't trust facility email or phones. No digital trails. When you leave tonight, take only original documents or certified copies. Nothing that could be called a theft of records. Focus on official papers that show contradictions, signatures that don't match, dates that can't be right." "There's a reporter," Angela said. "She's been covering the protests outside City Hall. The veterans and church groups have been there for days demanding action." Through the tiny window, we could hear those protests. Even now, a distant chorus of voices carried on the evening wind. The crowd had grown larger each day, led by veterans who recognized my name and elderly church members who brought lawn chairs and refused to leave. "Mayor Bergen's trying to ignore them," Angela continued, "but they're not letting him. This morning, Reverend Matthews led his entire congregation to City Hall. They're reading the names of everyone who's died in detention over and over." My expression remained neutral, but my eyes sharpened with interest. "The mayor's vulnerable to public pressure. He won't act on principle, but he will act to save his career." "It's working," Angela confirmed. "An hour ago, he ordered the police chief to cooperate with the state investigation. The chief tried to refuse, but Bergen threatened to replace him." For the first time, I saw real fear on the administrator's face when she heard "Victi." As if to emphasize the point, a new sound cut through the evening air. Sirens, but not the usual patrol cars. These were different, more urgent, drawing closer to the facility. "That's state police," I observed quietly, "and probably investigators. They'll want to secure records before anything can be destroyed." Angela straightened up, adjusting her uniform. "I have to finish my rounds. But tonight, when my shift ends." She left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear. "Be careful," I warned. "They'll be watching everyone more closely now. Don't change your routine. Don't act nervous. Just do your job until you walk out that door." Angela nodded, gathering her medical supplies with practiced efficiency. As she turned to leave, she paused. "I should have done this sooner. All those people—" "You're doing it now," I cut her off. "That's what matters." The cell door clanged shut behind Angela as she pushed her cart toward the next row of cells. Through the window, the sirens grew louder, more insistent. Change was coming, not in tweets or viral videos, but in official letterhead and court orders. The machine was about to meet something it couldn't ignore. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when a fleet of unmarked vehicles swept into the detention facility's parking lot. State police cruisers flanked them, lights flashing. Investigators in windbreakers emblazoned with State Attorney General poured out carrying boxes and equipment. Vance Caldwell stood in the facility's main entrance, his usual swagger deflating as an investigator thrust a thick stack of papers into his hands. "Federal warrant," the woman announced. "Step aside." "This is a federal facility," Caldwell blustered, his face reddening. "You have no jurisdiction here. I'll need to clear this with your superiors." "Have been notified," the investigator cut him off. "Federal immunity doesn't cover criminal acts outside the scope of duties. Unlawful detention, assault, evidence tampering. Those aren't policy, they're felonies." Teams of investigators moved through the building with methodical precision. They seized computers, copied hard drives, and collected surveillance footage. In the security office, technicians recovered data from confiscated phones, including fragments from Quinn Navarro's damaged device. The morning shift guards watched helplessly as their stations were documented and sealed. Several tried calling supervisors only to find their phones had been temporarily blocked, standard procedure during a raid. Angela Morales arrived for her shift just as investigators reached the medical wing. She walked straight to the lead investigator, hands steady now, and produced a thick manila envelope. "Everything's here," she said quietly. "Death certificates, falsified treatment logs, denial of care orders. I've been documenting it for months." The investigator opened the envelope, comparing Angela's records to data they'd already pulled from the facility's servers. "Times match perfectly," she muttered. "Discrepancies in official causes of death, multiple instances of backdated paperwork." She looked up at Angela. "We'll need your formal statement." A commotion erupted near the main entrance as Lena Price arrived, designer heels clicking against the floor tiles. "This is completely unnecessary," she announced to no one in particular. "We're in full compliance with our contract requirements." "Your contract doesn't authorize criminal negligence," an investigator replied, not looking up from his tablet, "or conspiracy to violate civil rights." Price's corporate polish cracked. "We follow all required procedures." "Like falsifying death certificates," the investigator finally looked up, "or ordering staff to deny medical care." Those procedures in a conference room turned temporary interview space. Investigators separated the guards for questioning. Most stuck to rehearsed answers about following protocol. But one young guard, faced with evidence of his involvement in my illegal transfer, broke down. "Caldwell said we had to make him disappear," he stammered. "Said he was causing trouble, making the agency look bad. We were supposed to lose his paperwork, route him through different facilities until people stopped asking questions." Down in the detention blocks, investigators photographed my injuries and took my statement. I recounted everything with military precision: times, names, specific threats. When they asked about the morning medical screening, I described Caldwell's taunts verbatim. Camera crews had gathered outside, alerted by police radio traffic. They filmed as I emerged from the facility, walking under my own power despite visible bruises. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for me. Caldwell tried retreating to his office, but investigators were already there boxing up files. His computer had been disconnected, its hard drive removed for analysis. His phone was being dumped for deleted messages. "This is harassment," he snapped. "I was conducting legitimate enforcement actions against a confirmed U.S. military commander." An investigator looked up from a file. "After verification of his identity, that's not enforcement, that's retaliation." "You can't prove intent," Caldwell said, but his voice wavered. The investigator smiled thinly. "Actually, we can. Your emails about teaching him a lesson, the orders to transfer him off books, the threats to guards about keeping quiet." She closed the file. "Want to see the rest?" In the hallway where he'd once cornered me, where he'd smiled while ordering guards to hurt me, Caldwell found himself surrounded by state police. An investigator read him his rights as cameras recorded through the windows. "Vance Caldwell, you're under arrest for civil rights violations, conspiracy, assault under color of authority." The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Unlike my detention, this arrest was by the book, fully documented and completely legal. Caldwell's face twisted as he recognized the irony. He was being treated with all the procedural care he'd denied others. Guards and staff watched silently as he was led out. No one moved to help him. No one spoke in his defense. The machine he'd used to crush others had finally jammed on truth, undeniable documented truth that no amount of bureaucratic maneuvering could erase. Angela stood in the medical wing doorway, watching investigators box up years of falsified records. For the first time in months, her hands were completely steady. Down the hall, other staff members were already talking to investigators, offering their own stories now that the dam had broken. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher as more official vehicles arrived, the facility's parking lot filled with forensics teams, document specialists, and civil rights attorneys. The system that had run on darkness was being exposed to light and would never be the same. The courthouse steps teemed with people under the hot afternoon sun. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like metal trees. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with church groups, retirees, and families. The crowd had started gathering before dawn, drawn by rumors of major announcements. State Attorney General Marion Walsh approached the podium, flanked by federal prosecutors and civil rights attorneys. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as she adjusted the microphone. Behind her, I stood quietly in my formal military uniform, ribbons and medals catching the sunlight. Following a comprehensive investigation, Walsh began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd, we are announcing multiple felony charges against former ICE Supervisor Vance Caldwell and several other officials involved in the unlawful detention and assault of Commander Lennox Hale. She held up a thick document. The indictments detail a pattern of deliberate civil rights violations, including assault under color of authority, unlawful detention, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. These weren't mistakes or misunderstandings. They were crimes committed by people who believed their badges placed them above the law. Reporters' hands shot up, but Walsh continued. Additionally, our investigation revealed systematic negligence and misconduct at the Redstone Detention Facility. Multiple deaths were covered up, medical care was routinely denied, records were falsified to hide violations. In the front row, Lena Price sat rigid, her corporate composure cracking as Walsh announced, the state has terminated its contract with Cornerstone Detention Services, effective immediately. The facility will be shut down, pending comprehensive federal and state reviews of all deaths and incidents during their management. Mayor Lyle Bergen stepped to the podium next, looking uncomfortable but determined. I also announced that Police Chief Marcus Davidson has been removed from his position effective immediately. His refusal to investigate federal officers who committed crimes in our jurisdiction was a dereliction of duty. We've appointed Interim Chief Sandra Martinez, who is committed to enforcing the law equally, regardless of what kind of badge someone wears. The crowd murmured approval. Several veterans nodded grimly. A church elder whispered, "About time." Inside the courthouse, the main hearing room was packed. Caldwell sat at the defense table, his usual swagger replaced by nervous fidgeting. His attorney kept whispering urgently in his ear, but Caldwell barely seemed to hear. Judge Rebecca Morton studied the charging documents carefully before looking up. The evidence presented here is deeply troubling. We have video footage, medical records, witness statements, and internal communications showing a coordinated effort to violate Commander Hale's rights and then cover it up. She fixed Caldwell with a stern gaze. Would you like to address these charges? Caldwell's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client was conducting legitimate enforcement operations against a confirmed U.S. military commander, Judge Morton interrupted. After her identity was verified, please don't insult this court's intelligence. When I took the stand, the room fell silent. I spoke clearly and precisely, describing events without embellishment or anger. I detailed the initial assault, the deliberate denial of my rights, the attempts to make me disappear into the system. My calm recitation made the cruelty even more stark. They knew who I was, I testified. They knew I was Delta Force. But Supervisor Caldwell said that didn't matter anymore, that my service meant nothing here. Then he ordered agents to tase me and drag me away in front of my neighbors. Angela Morales testified next, presenting carefully preserved records showing patterns of neglect and cover-ups. Her hands shook slightly as she described watching detainees suffer and die while treatment was denied. We were told to write natural causes on everything, she said, no matter what really happened. Other staff members came forward describing how Caldwell had ordered them to lose paperwork, deny calls, and isolate anyone who complained. One guard broke down describing how they were trained to make problems go away through transfers and isolation. The evidence mounted hour after hour, surveillance footage, email chains, falsified medical records, witness statements. Caldwell seemed to shrink in his chair as his actions were laid bare under fluorescent lights and sworn testimony. Judge Morton listened intently, taking careful notes. When the last witness finished, she set down her pen and surveyed the courtroom. The evidence presented here shows not just individual misconduct, but institutional failure on a massive scale. We've seen how quickly enforcement can become abuse when oversight fails and accountability disappears. She turned to where I sat. Commander Hale, please rise. I stood ramrod straight. As Judge Morton continued, this court orders your immediate and unconditional release with full restoration of status and privileges. Furthermore, all records related to this unlawful detention are to be expunged. The gavel crack echoed through the hushed room like a gunshot. The judge wasn't finished. Additionally, given the overwhelming evidence of criminal conduct, This court orders Vance Caldwell held without bail pending trial. The other charged officials will surrender their passports and remain under supervision. Caldwell's face went ash gray as bailiffs approached. His attorney started to object, but Judge Morton cut him off. Your client used detention as a weapon. Now he can experience it legally with all the rights he denied others. Outside, the crowd had grown larger. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing the scene as Caldwell was led out in handcuffs. Several of his former agents were already being processed in the courthouse basement. State investigators continued carrying boxes of evidence from their vehicles: computers, phones, hard drives, and files that documented years of abuse. Each piece would be cataloged, each incident investigated, each victim's story finally heard. The wheels of justice, so long stalled, had begun to turn. Morning sunlight crept across my front lawn, painting long shadows across the same steps where everything had started. The dew sparkled on grass that had been trampled weeks ago by aggressive boots and struggling bodies. Now that memory felt distant, as neighbors began gathering quietly in the cool morning air. Quinn Navarro stood with his parents near the maple tree where he'd filmed that first violent encounter. His new phone stayed in his pocket. This wasn't a moment for recording. Other faces appeared gradually. Mrs. Ramirez from 2 doors down, walking slowly with her cane. The Rodriguez family from across the street. Pastor Williams with several church elders, and a dozen veterans in pressed uniforms who had helped keep the pressure on City Hall. They assembled without fanfare or announcement. No police barriers, no news vans, no protesters with signs, just community members standing together in the gentle morning light, their presence making a different kind of statement. Mayor Bergen arrived looking humbled, his usual political polish replaced by genuine solemnity. The new interim police chief, Sandra Martinez, stood beside him in her crisp uniform, her face set with quiet determination. They carried a folder of official documents and a framed commendation. I emerged from my front door wearing my Delta Force dress uniform, medals gleaming in the early light. I moved with the same controlled grace I'd shown that first morning, but now there was peace in my stance rather than tension. The crowd parted respectfully as I descended the steps. "Commander Hale," Mayor Bergen began, his voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. "We gather here not just to honor your service, but to acknowledge our failure and commit to real change." He gestured to Chief Martinez, who stepped forward with the documents. "This morning, we're announcing the formation of the Community Justice Oversight Coalition," Martinez stated. "It will be permanently funded and legally empowered to monitor law enforcement activities, investigate complaints, and ensure accountability at every level." She handed me the papers. "Your experience exposed systematic failures that can never be repeated. This coalition ensures that won't happen." A sustained murmur of approval rippled through the gathered neighbors. Several veterans nodded firmly, their faces stern with approval. The mayor then lifted the framed commendation. "Commander Hale, for your courage in facing unlawful detention, your discipline in pursuing justice rather than vengeance, and your dedication to ensuring lasting change, we present this official commendation." He paused, adding quietly, "It won't undo what happened, but it stands as public record that truth prevailed." I accepted the frame with a precise nod, then turned to address the gathering. My voice carried clearly, measured and strong. "Thank you. But this moment isn't about medals or commendations." I gestured to Angela Morales, who stood nervously at the edge of the crowd. "It's about a nurse who saw wrong and spoke up, risking everything." Angela stepped forward, blushing as I continued. "It's about a teenage neighbor who kept filming when others looked away." Quinn straightened his shoulders, standing taller as several people patted his back. "It's about veterans who wouldn't let their oath be forgotten." I acknowledged the uniformed men and women. Church leaders who demanded moral courage from elected officials. Pastor Williams dabbed at his eyes. Families who showed up day after day until justice couldn't be ignored. I held up the coalition documents. This isn't just paper. It's proof that accountability is possible when community stands together, not with violence, not with vengeance, but with persistence and truth. Mrs. Ramirez thumped her cane emphatically. "Amen to that." Chief Martinez stepped forward again, her badge catching the morning light. "The coalition begins work immediately. We've already selected community representatives, legal advisors, and oversight committees. Every complaint will be investigated, every incident reviewed, no exceptions. The mayor added, "The City Council has approved permanent funding and granted the coalition legal authority to access records, conduct investigations, and issue binding recommendations. This isn't a symbolic gesture. It has real power to create change." I surveyed the gathered faces. Neighbors who had witnessed my humiliation now stood witness to this restoration. The street felt different, as if the community had awakened to its own strength. These weren't just houses anymore. They were homes protected by shared vigilance. People began approaching me individually, offering quiet words of support or simply clasping my hand. Mrs. Ramirez hugged me fiercely, whispering, "We've got your back now, honey." The Rodriguez children presented me with a hand-drawn card covered in wobbly stars. Quinn's parents thanked me for acknowledging their son's courage. "You showed him that doing the right thing matters," Quinn's father said, his voice rough with emotion. Angela Morales approached last, still seeming unsure of her place. I gripped her hands firmly. "Without your evidence, none of this happens," I said quietly. "You chose truth over fear. That's real courage." The gathering dispersed gradually, neighbors returning to their homes with new purpose. The veterans offered crisp salutes, which I returned sharply. Pastor Williams promised to keep the coalition in his prayers. Chief Martinez confirmed their first meeting would be next week. Soon, only the morning remained, peaceful and bright. The maple leaves rustled gently where Quinn had stood filming. A delivery truck drove past without slowing. Just another normal morning on a street that had found its voice. I climbed my front steps one more time, the commendation tucked under my arm, coalition papers held carefully. The same door that had witnessed violation now opened to welcome me home. I stepped inside, closed it gently behind me, and for the first time since that dawn weeks ago, breathed in peace. I stood on my porch that morning as an ordinary man, a veteran who had served his country in silence, only to be treated like a threat in my own home. What unfolded wasn't just an injustice. It was a brutal reminder of how quickly power can twist into cruelty when no one is watching, when accountability is allowed to fade. Yet the real lesson came later, not from the tasers or the cuffs or the cold isolation cells, but from the people who refused to look away. A teenage neighbor kept filming even when his phone was smashed. A nurse, trembling with fear, chose to smuggle out evidence instead of staying silent. Veterans stood outside gates day after day, reading the names of those who never came home. Church members brought lawn chairs and stayed until their voices could no longer be ignored. Ordinary people, neighbors, strangers, fellow citizens, turned their quiet outrage into persistent, unbreakable pressure. And that pressure cracked open a system that had grown comfortable hiding behind paperwork and procedure. The deepest truth I carry now is this: real change rarely comes from one hero standing alone. It comes when enough people decide that someone else's pain is their responsibility too. When we stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "Why not them?" When we understand that silence in the face of wrong is a choice, and courage is choosing differently, even when your hands shake. That morning I was dragged away believing I might disappear. Instead, a community reminded me, and reminded the world, that no one is invisible when enough hearts decide to see. What about you? Have you ever witnessed something wrong and felt that quiet pull to speak up, even when it scared you? Or has someone's courage given you strength when you needed it most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories matter. If this touched you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss the next story that reminds us what we're capable of when we stand together. Thank you for being here. Let's keep choosing courage.